Hey, Mark, where are we?
Well, that's a great question, Dan. Hey, this is Mark. I'm here with Dan Cavallari, and we are nowhere near where we usually are. In fact, we are in, let me see if I say it right, Buena Vista. Buena Vista.
If you're from Colorado, it's just BV.
BV. We're in BV.
We're in BV.
At Deerhammer Distillery.
This is definitely not my garage.
It's bigger than your garage, and it smells way better.
Way better.
Way better than your garage. We're here with Lenny Eckstein, owner, founder, co-founder, I guess, with your wife.
That's right. Yeah.
Of Deerhammer Distillery.
Yeah, that's right.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, man. Thanks for making the trek to beautiful Buena Vista.
It is beautiful.
Yeah.
It is beautiful.
It was a nice drive in.
Yeah, I live in Colorado, but not this Colorado.
Yeah. Well, it's all good. You know, you guys have more restaurants. We have more mountains.
Much more mountain, much closer mountains.
Yeah.
That's true.
Awesome.
I would take the mountains.
Yeah, so this is exciting for us too. Thanks for having us. Tell us, I want to start at the beginning because, you know, we can all read websites and stuff, but what got you this far? You aren't from Colorado. So first of all, what got you out to Colorado and when was that?
Yeah, that is a good place to start, I suppose. I grew up in Philadelphia and, you know, I did my thing out there, lived in the suburbs, moved to the city, and I went to art school. So my background is kind of in commercial art, graphic design. And shortly after graduating school, I was young. I mean, I think I'm 46 now. I lose track a lot. But somewhere in my early 20s, yeah, I was, you know, I was looking for adventure, looking for fun, looking for something. Mm-hmm. And I was into snowboarding a lot at the time. So Colorado had that appeal going on. Yeah, I made my way out. I ended up in Denver. I did become quite the fan of the craft beer scene that was blowing up at the time in, you know, the late 90s, early 2000s, you know, going to the Great American Beer Fest and visiting everyone I could. And at some point, I always like to learn as much as I can about stuff. If I have the time and I can take a deep dive into it, a lot of times I'm going to. And at that time, beer was something I wanted to know more about. And I had a job that where our office was just down the street from a spot called Beer at Home. And that was really, I wandered in one day, and that kind of was the kicking off point to all things, this crazy spiral of learning everything I could about beer and fermentation and flavors and evaluation and all of that. So,
was that the beginning? Obviously, you probably didn't have classes on that in art school.
Yeah, no. I did my best on consumption at that time. There wasn't a whole lot of, I just didn't have the time and resources to make it happen on that side, or maybe the curiosity at the time. But I do think that was the beginning of what got me here. Mm-hmm. You know, I started brewing beer a lot. I had a house in Golden that overlooked Coors, which was something of an inspiration, I suppose. And I took over the basement that my wife and I, of the house we owned, and turned it into my little home brewery.
Nice.
And
mad scientist lab.
Yeah. And like years later, an insane amount of beer produced later, it actually kind of segued into home distillery, which is questionably legal, but
let's say you thought about that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
It's interesting that you started with the fermentation part, because I've got this theory that there's some distilleries doing good things with young whiskey, and I think it's those where the distillers have a background in fermentation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, in a sense, I would agree, because that's where I feel like I came from. But if you look at some of the guys who are really inspiring, be it from the beginning or doing new things now, I think you can't really talk about that without talking about Todd Leopold and what the Leopold brothers are doing with regard to having such a deep understanding of beer initially and fermentation and bringing certain qualities to some really interesting things they're starting to do in their whiskeys. But then, across the board, there's so many folks now from beer backgrounds that are bringing those sensibilities with yeast handling and grain selection and even just fermentation style and how it differs from the heritage brands. I think too, some of the larger distilleries are so automated. The people that come up through those ranks, I wonder, I don't know because I'm never there, but I wonder, do they really know how to turn the knobs like they did in the old days? And I think that's what, like, you got a feel for that is the fermentation, the whole process. I think it's got to make a difference when you're talking about a product with so many variables. Well, I think it does. And I think, given the opportunity, I think a lot of the be it head distillers, or oftentimes I'll even refer to them as brewers if they're doing the mashing and fermentation. I think given the opportunity, those guys might let loose a bit more and explore, what might be considered experimental for them, if not held to the relative shackles of what their brand has to continue to put out. And you do get some cool experimentation from big guys like Buffalo Trace, I think, carries the flag for always pushing the limits and doing some neat things, be it on the fermentation side or the maturation side with their wood or all sorts of things.
Yeah, I agree. But don't you think, I don't want to get into that big guy versus little guy thing, but don't you think to some point they're pushing within a set of boundaries where you've got some flexibility to do things that they don't necessarily really have?
No question about it.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a massive bourbon tradition in this country. And I think where craft fits in, and certainly where Deerhammer fits in, is to say, well, where is the room for what else? And that's what craft is all about.
Cool. So from the beer in the basement and the thoughts of distillation, because you shouldn't distill stuff in your basement. How did you make that jump from I'm learning this stuff, I'm having fun with it, to what we're sitting in now, all these barrels everywhere?
Well, being someone who went to art school and has sucked historically and continues to suck at all things math and spreadsheet related.
You guys are on the right side of the table.
We're kindred spirits. I like this guy.
I knew so little about business, but I knew I was also a pretty terrible employee. And I was
total kindred spirit.
I had this it was time to do something on my own, sink or swim or whatever was going to happen. I was going to do it. And I think a lot of folks in business who don't have that formal training or background or upbringing in the corporate world, not knowing what I was about to jump into was for the best, because I would have been too scared had I known what was to come. And it was definitely, it still is. We started Deerhammer in 2010, just getting the wheels rolling, registering the company. I like to tell people when I'm going to do something, just because I don't like backing out of whatever I say. Yeah. So, in 2010, I started saying I'm opening a distillery. I'm going to make whiskey. It's going to be awesome. And I was like, I said it. I got to do it. And man, there was a lot that really started unraveling from there. We, my wife was on board on the level of being supportive of all this. And she loved the idea of having something, that she could help with on the business side, something independent, because she was a nurse at the time. And I guess technically she still is. If anybody gets injured at Deerhammer, she's first on the scene.
My wife's a nurse. It's incredibly convenient to have a nurse
awesome.
around.
Yeah.
Especially when you're drinking.
Yeah. We just decided we're going to do this, and we both we loved this town, Buena Vista. We both, are avid whitewater kayakers and love to mountain bike, and there's so much greatness here for that. The Arkansas River runs right through town, and it really just drew us in. We figured we can open a distillery anywhere. It doesn't matter where you make it. You're shipping it out no matter what. And it all kind of clicked. We found a building that was absolutely perfect. And, we were looking in some ridiculous places and obscure industrial parks and places that never would have let us get to where we really need to be. Mm-hmm. We happened upon our location, which is, right on East Main Street in BV, gets a good amount of foot traffic, and having a tasting room, which is something that most states allow distillers to do, but Colorado is very proactive in that. That was a huge component of allowing us to thrive early on, because whiskey takes a long time.
Yeah. And the regulatory hurdles. So from 2010, when you said it out loud, how long before there was a business in place and people in that business?
Right. Well, I guess we acquired the building in 2011. We received our distilled spirit plant permit, which is what you need to legally run a still. And we got that at the end of 2011. And as soon as we got that, I want to say it was December 2011, we ran our still for the first time. Awesome. Immediately. And that was an interesting batch, actually. It wasn't whiskey. We had the opportunity to distill some wine from a neighboring winery, Vino
So a little
Salida,
brandy
down the road.
action.
So yeah, our very first run was brandy. So that's how we broke our still in.
Outstanding.
Yeah, yeah.
And it looked like you built a lot of this yourself, right?
Yeah,
Not the still, but
That's right.
You built a lot of that yourself.
I did. I mean, I did a lot myself. We didn't have that much of startup funding. So anything that I thought I could do, I did. My soft hands from tapping computer keys got beat up pretty quick, cutting into the cement to build a floor drain and, really everything. I tracked down just whatever low dollar used tanks I could find in whatever condition they were. I made pretty good friends with a local welder in town, and we just started making everything happen. It was very cobbled together. It was like a giant homebrew setup that was now making whiskey. And, I didn't make the still. I did acquire that one from a guy who makes pretty rustic style pot stills. And that's something Deerhammer has been about from day one, is sticking to those traditions. Yeah.
So that's the pot still thing versus column stills always comes up a lot. And maybe you can, as part of this little visit, you can explain why they're so different, but they definitely get different flavors. You get a funkier, old school kind of feel out of a pot still, don't you, than a column still? Yeah,
you do. And I think from my perspective, and I've got, everybody has their journey with regards to appreciation for not even just whiskey, but spirits in general. What really brought me into this was discovering a love for what was coming out of Scotland. And really, I wasn't ruling out anywhere, but I was finding that my favorite whiskeys were coming from distilleries that had pot stills that generated full flavor spirit. And there's a lot of ways to do that, but there's also pot stills that generate a lighter bodied spirit. I don't quite know why. I guess it was just my thing, but I wanted Deerhammer to be known for big flavor, long finish. And, I think there's a lot of experimentation that could be done, but very few places have the opportunity to really do back-to-back exacting experiments that are like scientifically, there. Now, I've never milled, mashed, fermented, and distilled through, a Kentucky beer still that they traditionally make bourbon on in Kentucky versus our pot still. But I think the going wisdom, and it's kind of my sentiment on this, is you will get the most full-flavored, complex flavors from the distillate off of the pot still. More so, I would say, than you would the long-plated column still that is, on some level, redistilling this your spirit over and over again and mellowing out the flavor a bit. There's some tremendous stuff that comes off of those stills that I'm a huge fan of. But part of it is I want to make a big, full-bodied spirit that doesn't have that reflux where as the vapor is coming up, it's falling back down.
I was going to say that makes sense because a lot of Kentucky whiskey is all about smooth. It's all about consistent.
Yep.
If you want to make a big, fat, raucous whiskey, that probably isn't the place, or at least it wouldn't be your first place to start.
Right. Well, it doesn't, in a lot of cases with those brands, it doesn't necessarily fit into their profile or their portfolio. And, there's some exceptions to that to some extent. You've got brands like Woodford Reserve that run pot stills, but they're not bottling, as far as I know. The majority of their product is a blend of both pot still distillate and the majority column still distillate. Or you've got guys like Michter's that do have pot stills, and they're doing some cool experiments on them, but we haven't tasted those
I was going to say, we hadn't even tasted that stuff yet.
No, but that's going to be cool. I can't wait for that. So, I am a big fan of that, and I think more guys are going that direction. I'm friends with a ton of other distillery owners that share the same pot still philosophy. That's how they did it back in the day. There's more efficient ways of making whiskey. Column still distillation will yield more whiskey than you will get, or distillate than you will get out of a pot still. But it's a fun way to make stuff. It
does seem more hands-on.
Yeah,
we're fans of all whiskey.
I like whiskey.
We like whiskey. Yeah. I'm gonna tell you, I don't mean to keep harping on this, but this smells way better in this rack house than your garage.
You telling me you don't like the smell of gas leaking out of my motorcycle?
see if Lenny we can just take one of these to Dan's garage. We'll bring it back whenever you need it.
It'll probably be empty.
Funny story about somebody accidentally taking a barrel.
Accidentally taking a barrel.
Yeah, they thought it was empty. I don't think they actually did, but yeah.
That's kind of like I thought about making whiskey in my basement.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So when did you add, was the restaurant and the food piece always part of it? Was it always going to be an attraction rather than just a production facility?
A lot of the things that we are doing now and will continue to do, I'm quite sure, are, I hate to say we're winging it, but as something kind of comes into our sights, we're like, you know what, sounds like a good idea. Let's try this. That's really my wife and I and our team, who is very supportive and helpful in making these decisions. We look at these things and think like, what would we like to do? And that's a fun thing about building a brand when the brand is representative of your own values, and what you think is a great experience. So, to the point of your question, our tasting room, that was always the idea. We always wanted to be able to present our efforts and our whiskey to people in an educational format, in an enjoyable sharing kind of way, and expose people to cocktails as well. Because, while my go-to drink is going to be whiskey neat, or on a hot day, I might throw an ice cube in there. Myself, my wife, and really our whole crew, we all geek out about, and have for a long time, about cocktail culture and its value, and where it belongs and what a great cocktail is.
Are you hearing this, Dan?
I'm here, and I'm still not a believer, but I'm here.
I think Lenny's going to turn you into a believer to a nice cocktail.
Am I going to have a religious moment at the Deerhammer
Dan
Distillery?
once looked at me and went, "I don't drink mixed drinks like you do." I'm like, it's not a mixed drink; it's a cocktail, and there's a difference.
Dumping sugar on some good whiskey.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, but for us, we just saw it as a way to really get our product out there to folks, because not everybody is ready to jump into cask strength single barrel whiskey.
Right.
Yeah. Nor should they be.
No. And maybe they'll get there. Maybe they'll always stick. I think an old fashioned is a great drink, and as are the classics. Like a Sazerac is phenomenal. And even we make some goofy tiki drinks. Like we'll do like a version of a Mai Tai, or we do a Singapore Sling, and it's fun stuff.
But there are Sazeracs and old fashions and Manhattans and Red Hooks being made in my house all week long.
I just can't believe you guys are sitting here talking about cocktails. We're surrounded by beautiful barrels of...
The beautiful barrels at the base of a beautiful cocktail.
You're hurting my feelings.
They're all flavors.
Well, it's funny that we talk about that too, that when distilleries start, and Dan and I end up talking about this a lot, you have options when you start the distillery. I mean, you could have sourced, you could have done this or that. How did you come up with, this is going to be the plan? Was it more, there's the still, we just got the license, let's run something?
I'm glad you asked that question. That's a good point. I kind of lost sight of that when you brought up the food thing. The reason why we decided we wanted this tasting room, and we do have a food truck as well, which is a nice complement to the offerings. I got into this because I love the process. I didn't get into it because I love business, and I've come to love business. It's pretty cool, but I love to make whiskey, and I love to make my own thing. I came at this from kind of somewhat of an artistic background, and to not have an expression that is our own from start to finish, where we control everything that we find compelling, nothing else held interest. And while I do see the merit in not only sourcing great product, but the art of blending that and maybe finishing it in some unique barrels and making it one's own, it's not my thing. I mean, I just never had interest. And if I'm not interested, I'm not doing it, which is a reoccurring thing every day with me.
Well, you said the first thing was a brandy, and I did notice that there is an apple brandy you've done recently.
Yeah.
So that stuff, is the apple brandy aged?
Yep. That's a 5-year-old apple brandy. And we've got some just behind me up there that's about 3 years old now. So we're trying to let our brandy always hit 5 years, but sometimes it comes out earlier. It comes out when it's ready, but if it can sit longer, it sits longer.
And you do a gin too, right?
We do a gin. That came out later.
I know that because I have a bottle on my shelf at home.
I love hearing that. That's a funny tangent on the gin. I was never a gin hater, but I was never a gin fan per se. I got into this to make whiskey and really any full flavored spirits. Brandy is another one that I think is really compelling. I love rum. Nobody really drinks it, so we don't make it that often, but I do like rum as well. Another full flavored spirit. Gin, it took about 2 years before Deerhammer took a crack at gin. And I found that going to all these whiskey festivals or spirit festivals, other Colorado distilleries were turning out some gins that I found super delicious. And, when you look at the history of gin, prior to gin, there was Genever, or Genever, as they call it here sometimes. And that is what came from Holland. And it was a malt-based gin. So they used malted barley as the base spirit. And they used primarily juniper, coriander, and citrus. And as I'm reading a book about the history of gin, I was like, we make malt stuff.
We can do
this. Yeah. And it took a while. I mean, it's
There's
not
flowers
easy
all over
per
the
se.
place around here.
Yeah, right. And actually, of course, I thought, I'm going to forage my own juniper. It took a solid 2 hours to get about a quarter pound. And I want to say we used 7 pounds per batch. So, yeah, I don't know how people forage for things like that.
That's interesting. So you were in business for a while. Where my head was going was maybe you made gin for a while because it doesn't have to be aged. And then while the bourbons laid down or the single malts laid down. But what was the order?
Yeah, well, we for sure should have made gin first. I mean, that would have been a smart thing to do. The order was an unaged malt whiskey immediately following the first batch of brandy we did. And that was our mainstay for a long time. We filled a barrel pretty quickly, and we were slinging what we referred to as our whitewater whiskey. And It was an unaged malt whiskey that worked really well in cocktails. And I still love the stuff, but no one cares about unaged whiskey. It's just not a category really that people want. And I think it's an important thing, be it, in Kentucky, they call it white dog. In Scotland, they call it new make. The whole name of white whiskey dropped off real quick over the years. But I think it's important to taste and to know what is going to become. Obviously, we have to taste it, but I like giving other people the opportunity to taste it too. So while we don't have it in the tasting room, I definitely have some that you guys can try later.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, I think if you can't make it good off the still, it's not going to get any better.
In a barrel,
Yeah.
It'll get different. I don't think it's going to get any better.
No. What I would say is kind of interesting, though, is that one can, if one is planning on maturing in a barrel for 7 to 12 years, which, 12 is the long side of American whiskey production for sure, you can take a pretty big cut off the still because it will mellow in time. If you're going to age for something closer to 3 to 5 years, you take a narrower cut. Well, that narrower cut does taste better off the still. Like no one in any world, other than a distiller who's like, no, this big cut does taste good because that's what I'm looking for. The narrow cut on a pot still is where it's at.
So you're talking about the heads, the heart, and the tails. You can have a broader section in that center. You consider the heart if you're going to age longer.
That's exactly right. It's heads is a very what we're really talking about is when the distillate that we've made first starts running off the spirit still in our case, the very first runnings contain, they're for sure heads. The first gallon or so has some methanol and acetone and ketones and some super gnarly stuff that doesn't taste good. It won't really make you go blind.
Yeah, it cleans the floor really well.
Yeah, I think it'll get you sick. I've never really had any intention of consuming it. There's not a whole lot of methanol generated in grain-based stuff. Fruit, for sure, there's a lot. But yeah, I guess circling back to what your comment was or question, we are pretty discriminate about making sure that we just don't pull that stuff from the early ranks. Not only the first gallon, but the first 5 or so gallons. Like I've said it before, we're not a very efficient distillery. We could take a bigger cut, but it wouldn't taste good at the 3-year mark in barrels. And our stuff, we're always trying to get it older and older. We started with a 2-year window of time where we wouldn't, harvest under 2 years. Now we're at 3 years. We hope to be at 4 years next year or so.
Well, that's actually the reason we started talking was you heard us talking about young whiskey.
That's right.
And that's directly applicable to some of the things Dan and I are tasting and trying to find in young whiskey. I never thought about that. I mean, until you just explained that, I never thought, well, maybe they're taking a narrower cut, or maybe that's why some of the young ones are so good. They're very thoughtful about where in that run they're pulling the whiskey out.
Yeah. I really think that a distiller that wants to make a delicious whiskey, knowing from the get-go that they're not going to be sitting in the barrel for possibly even 3 years. They might only get a year and a half in. If you know that that's the case, there are tools to come out with phenomenal whiskey. I've tasted some great stuff at the 18-month mark. I like some of my stuff at the young age, but from other distilleries, like Neely Family Distillery out in Sparta, Kentucky makes a phenomenal bourbon at 18 months old, and it's getting older still. But yeah, there's some great stuff out there. And in Colorado as well. I think it was 2 nights ago, I was sipping on some stuff from, what's their name? Elkins Distillery out in Estes Park. And they have a single barrel rye that I had a bottle of. And I don't think it's much more than a year old. Maybe it's 2 years. It was delicious. If you do it right, you can make a great young whiskey.
Yeah, but you got to taste it.
Yeah,
you just can't judge that book by the cover.
Yep. And there's some bunk out there.
Well, and so we're certainly finding that, and we want to broaden out our little, little blanket that we sit on, because it's hard as a consumer in the base, the consumer base we're serving. It's hard to say, go try this 18-month-old whiskey. It costs $75. I don't know if it's any good or not. I want to do that. I want to taste all that stuff, but I don't have an unlimited amount of money, nor do most new consumers. So
no, and even space. You know, how many bottles can you have? It can get tricky.
Well, we find a way.
So it's taken over my house.
Yeah, mine too.
Especially since I don't consider myself a collector. Like I don't have any really super high-end bottles of whiskey. I just have bottles I haven't opened yet. So to have so many is kind of silly.
Right.
I know a guy you can pawn them off on if you want. Yeah.
We share.
I'm always here for you.
You are. Yeah, we share. What else, Dan? This is a good primer.
I have a question about your. Well, first of all, I have a couple questions. All right, well, let's back up. You said you're 46.
Yeah.
All right, that's BS. He's not 46. There's no way this guy's 46. He's like a hard 27. Let's say.
Whiskey keeps you young.
I was going to say there's got to be some
water of life.
Tell me about the medicinal properties of Deerhammer. You said you were into graphic design. Did you design the logo and the word mark?
Yeah. So initially, let's see. I mean, this won't help in audio, but somewhere around here, there's an example. One of our barrel heads, just to my left, has a more rustic version of our logo, and that was the original.
Okay.
I did design that. That was a while back, and I always knew it wasn't quite where I wanted it to be. Sure. And as we were stepping into a minimum 2-year maturation and branching out into a fuller whiskey lineup beyond our American single malt, and we were dropping our unaged whiskey and incorporating some new stuff, I thought it was time for a bit of a rebrand, although similar. And I worked closer to what you're seeing now, which is our current, mark. I ultimately found another designer that I worked with who we kind of bounced back and forth with. It was a pretty fun process, actually. He had a better, type design kind of skill set, better illustrative skill set. And I found that he was sending stuff my way and I was reviewing it and critiquing it. And he would say like, yeah, no problem, I can do that. And he'd send back to me. And then I'd start working on it and show him. And he was like, yeah, it's not bad. What if you did this? And I was like, whoa, this is all like, I'm paying you, but I'm getting directed on this. I guess that works.
And he's telling his friends, I'm working with this guy with a design background. Oh my God.
Fucking guy.
No. So this guy actually did a ton of the work. And, but it was a really fun process because I kind of stepped out of my career in design before what the next step would have been, more or less like creative director, art director. And I sort of get to fulfill that on the fringe here a little bit. So I do enjoy that.
Is the deer the hammer or is the deer hammered? Where did the name come from?
Great question. So, in kind of honor and reverence to this town that we love, Buena Vista, we wanted to try to find some kind of historical tie-in. And, we were looking around and we came across the namesake of one of the original residents. Her name was Alcina Deerhammer, and she was known to be a bit of a character in town. One of the first settlers here. And, my wife came across this while reading about the history. And she was like, what about Deerhammer? I was like, man, could work. It's kind of a neat name. And there are deer all over the place in this town. And it just kind of fit, like the idea of that we make these, pot distilled, full flavored whiskeys. And it all started to kind of click together. Sure. So, yeah.
It's interesting because we talk a lot about, the brand story. And I think a lot of distilleries they rely on that a little too heavily. But I think when they interplay and make sense, I think it's a compliment to the whiskey. And so, Deerhammer is kind of a badass name, and it's kind of neat that it has its roots here, and that you guys found a historical aspect to it. So,
well, what doesn't match the badass name is the fact that I'm a non-hunting vegetarian. so I get a lot of guys who come in and they're like, "Do you get an elk this year?" I'm like, "Yeah."
I saw an elk this year. I don't know. I saw an elk eating the same meal that I eat. I don't know.
Outstanding. All right, this is good. It's a good little introduction. I'm glad we had a bite to eat in the restaurant. Yeah. Outstanding.
We're prepared now.
We're prepared.
Yes.
We're going to taste some whiskey. We'll shut this one down for a while. Lenny, thanks for the history lesson.
Yeah, man.
Dan and I are extremely excited to be educated.
Yes.
Because rather than stumble through things ourselves, it's going to be nice to have a professional's guidance. Yeah. So we'll do some of that. the talk about the logo, don't worry. We'll have plenty of pictures of that on the website. We'll do some video sections too and have those on the YouTube channel. And we'll probably sit down, hopefully one more time if Lenny has time, and kind of do a follow-up or a wrap-up once we've drank everything. And you can tell that that's then because we'll sound like we drank everything.
I'm going to drink that barrel.
I don't think we get to pick. I think Lenny has to pick. All right.
Boy can wish.
Yeah. Good times. All right, cheers.